brain always has a reason for what it's doing, even with extreme cases like PTSD. Anytime we're doing something or experiencing something, it's because our brain thinks that's beneficial. And oftentimes it's mistaken. I wouldn't say that anyone who is experiencing depression because their brain decided that depression was the right way to go, I wouldn't say that their brain is correct. I would say that their brain is confused.
Is our perceived experience of life, joy, peace, sadness, and even suffering, is that 100% in our control?
I may upset some people by saying this, but we got a new device called a transcranial magnetic stimulation. We'd map out their brain and we would situate the coils on a specific part of their brain and then fire a very specific frequency of these pulses. We were teaching this part of their brain to fire more, or this part of their brain to not fire as much. When they stimulate it, the sensation that people describe is, I feel like there is a storm coming, but I'm ready to face it. I don't think it would be going too far to say that we would literally save lives doing that.
Common wisdom was that we use 10% of our brains. Would you say that's accurate? And then are we ever going to get to a point where we can use more of our brain than 10% of it?
We don't need bigger brains. We just need more efficient brains. We can create pathways really, really fast, but breaking down those pathways takes a little bit longer. And so the key is, we used to think that neurogenesis and neuroplasticity slowed down mid-20s, late 20s. Now we know it's not that it slows down, it just doesn't become the default. Start first with trying to increase neurogenesis in your anterior mid-cingulate cortex. And the way that we do that is we just do something.
Bryson, why do you think our brains are so easily addicted to negative habits or behaviors, yet we don't as easily fall into positive habits or behaviors?
Ooh, that's a good one. Humankind did not develop evolutionarily to thrive and to be happy. It was all based on being able to survive. And usually, in order to survive, surviving is about not dying and not getting attacked by a bear and not falling off the edge of a cliff. It's all about making sure these things that are going to kill us don't happen. You can survive and pass your genes on to your kids while being miserable. So that didn't really get ingrained into our DNA. It's not just this natural tendency that we have to gravitate towards thriving and happiness. But it is very possible that the potential for that has always been in our DNA. But I think we are constantly looking for everything that could go wrong. And we're looking for comfort and we're looking for safety. And a lot of the times that's going to be the easy way out. And it's going to be the things that have the immediate payoff. That's just kind of how our brain is wired. It's, you taste something really sweet, you immediately get a dopamine response. Our brain's trying to reward us for doing something that is advantageous for our survival. Even though meditating daily, that's going to be very advantageous for our survival, but it's not going to have that immediate payoff. And so I think a lot of it is based on the fact that fear is a powerful tool in the evolutionary process, but it is not necessarily a powerful tool in our journey towards a happy, thriving, successful life. So unfortunately, our brain likes to pay more attention to things that are fearful, or rather it defaults to that whenever we're not consciously taking control.
As we're on the topic of our ancestors, have we always had to strive to be mindful, to move away from maybe negative habits? Or is this something we've just discovered in our more modern history?
I think that it's definitely something that has become more of a challenge in the last 10, 15, 20 years. I wouldn't say that, farmers and ranchers 100 years ago were considered mindful people. I don't think they were distracted people. I think they just lived their life and they didn't have these distractions. It's almost like there wasn't a need to take time out of their day to sit down and be mindful and pay attention to how they were feeling. It was just, what else are you going to do when you're plowing your field, or when you are you know, riding your horse into town that it takes 3 hours there, 3 hours back. What else are you going to do but sit with your feelings and pay attention to the nature around you? Whereas now we have to be really, really deliberate with our mindfulness and our awareness, because if we don't take that proactive approach, the world will take that mindfulness out of us and it will put something else in our mind. That's just how the world works this day. People make money when they can take your attention. It didn't used to always be like that, but now with technologies and cell phones and social media, mindfulness has become a necessary, deliberate process and an activity that we have to choose to participate in versus something that just happens naturally because we're going about our day.
Why is it important to be mindful of what's going on in, like, with your feelings, your thoughts, your emotions?
Well, awareness is always the first step in any process of growth or change. It is, I would say it is impossible to grow. You can, okay, we can change. Change is, it could be either good or bad. It just, something has changed.
Mm-hmm.
But growth, deliberate change in a specific direction, I think always has to have some element of awareness to start. You need to be aware of, and then you need to be able to recognize what exactly is happening. What do I like this habit? Is this habit beneficial for me? Is this mental state beneficial for me? And then once you have that awareness and that recognition, then you can actually start working on the growth. But without awareness, without that mindfulness, I don't think you can really grow at all. In fact, looking back on the times in my life where I have felt stagnant, it has been the times that I have been filling my life with distractions, or I just haven't been proactively adding in awareness and mindful activities, whether it's social media or TV, or even just distracting myself with rock climbing, which is it's a good thing. But if I'm using it as a way to escape from that awareness and that mindfulness of how I'm feeling, I can't recognize where I am now and how that is different than where I want to be. So yes, I think awareness is absolutely essential for growth because it is that first step in that process.
Going back to your rock climbing analogy, how do we balance doing things like, okay, so you're going rock climbing, but are you going rock climbing to cope with the stress of the day and what's going on? Or are you going rock climbing because it's something you do that makes you happy and you're like your intention? How do we manage the balance of what we're doing intentionally so that we're doing it for the right reasons? I hope that question made sense.
If we are using it as a way to escape, then it's going to be hard for it to be beneficial. It's just going to delay the inevitable, and it's going to, in fact, compound the stress, because by trying to shut out the stress, we are ignoring it. So our brain wants to drive our attention towards it more because it's like, hey, this stress is important. If you ignore it, I have to turn the volume up until you're able to hear it. But anything can either be an escape or a mindfulness practice. I always encourage people, find a sport, find a hobby, do something, and be totally present while you're doing it. People think of mindfulness as this meditation, sitting with your legs crossed, watching the sunrise. And although I think that's a great way to meditate and to develop mindfulness, I found, for me, rock climbing to be an incredible way to develop mindfulness, because not only am I paying attention to my mental state, am I afraid of falling right now? Do I think I'm going to fall? Is this well-placed fear? Do I actually have a risk of falling? Would it be a dangerous fall? But also, I'm more aware and mindful of my body. Where exactly is my toe? How exactly am I holding this rock with my hands, with my fingers? And so, to take this back to that rock climbing example, there was a time in my life where I was using climbing as a way to escape. I had just gone through a really, really hard breakup where I thought this girl was the one. Looking back, I'm glad it didn't work out. But it really, really got to me. So I was using rock climbing as an excuse. I was like, rock climbing's a good thing. I'm just gonna, use rock climbing to distract myself temporarily. And then I realized it was preventing me from feeling the feelings that I needed to feel in order to understand where I currently was and why I didn't want to be there. And as soon as I switched from allowing rock climbing to be a distraction and escape, and I shifted it to a tool to developing this internal awareness, it was hard at first because all of a sudden I was feeling everything I had shut out for a long time. But feeling it and becoming aware of it, using the tool of mindfulness via climbing, all of a sudden I was able to deal with that. I was able to work through the frustrations and even the anger that I had surrounding this experience. And then as I was able to work through it, I was able to replace it with something better. And all of a sudden I was growing again. My actions hadn't changed. I was still rock climbing multiple times a week, but my focus was different. How I was choosing to use that activity of climbing. And then it doesn't have to be rock climbing. I'm biased, of course, I love it. But it could be fishing, it could be knitting, it could be playing the piano, guitar, gardening, going on a walk with your dog. Any of these things can either be an escape or a mindfulness practice. And when it's an escape, it's going to prevent growth. Even if it's helping lower our stress levels temporarily, if it's a coping skill and we're using that coping skill to just decrease the pain so we don't have to deal with the pain, it's going to prevent the growth. And consequently, it's going to prevent happiness and peace. But if we use it to develop mindfulness, to become aware of our state of being, use it to lower our stress so that we can then deal with the problem, so we're not just emotionally overwhelmed. If we're able to do that, then there's so much growth that is unlocked for us, especially because now we have a vehicle for figuring out where our limiting beliefs are, where our weaknesses are, and what's holding us back. So that's why I tell everybody, like, find something to do. Find something that's going to challenge you, but be present and be mindful. And that alone, I think, is going to unlock so much growth for people. Every single incredible life coach, mentor, TEDx speaker, all of them have something that they're passionate about and that they are obsessed with. And it is through that thing that they have learned all these other things. No one learns by just reading books all day. That unlocks some knowledge, but they don't learn the knowledge. You can think about how you want to grow and how you want to change, but until you go out, you don't know how you need to grow and how you need to change. Until you run up and you hit a wall and realize, I need to get stronger in this specific way to get over this wall. And we see that happen with athletes. We see it with working through mental and emotional issues, everything, relationships even. It all comes down to, you got to take action. You got to do something to figure out what needs changed.
You started that off by talking about how you were using rock climbing to cope and suppress feelings. And when I think about that, it makes me wonder, do our feelings drive our thoughts, or do our thoughts drive our feelings?
Ooh, this is the age-old question, and it's in cognitive neuroscience, it's still an ongoing debate. And when it comes down to it, the stance that I like to take is, I think it goes both ways. I think that our feelings are going to affect the thoughts that we have, but also our thoughts and what we've chosen to focus on is very much going to affect our mental and emotional state. I don't think it has to be one or the other. We see it in the body where our posture and our facial expression is going to affect our internal mood. But then at the same time, our internal mood is going to affect our facial expression and our posture. And it doesn't have to be one or the other. In fact, I think that's a beautiful thing, that it's a process that goes both ways, because sometimes I'm able to shift my mood internally and consequently feel different. Other times I'm not able, the emotions are just too big. They're too heavy. I can't do that, but I can change my posture. I can put a smile on my face until I start feeling a little bit better. I can choose to focus on specific thoughts until I feel a certain way, or I can choose to sit in this emotion until the thoughts come to me about why I'm feeling this way. So I think a lot of people get hung up on which way does it go. But I think when it comes down to it, it doesn't matter as long as you are aware that there is this connection and that you put your effort and your energy in the direction that is going to be most beneficial for you. I have a story. Granted, I've kind of taken this a little bit different direction than the thoughts versus feelings, but using this parallel example to illustrate that there is this connection. So I know someone. She was a young mother, and her son, when he was about a year old, got stung by a scorpion and had to get helivaced to a hospital that was hours away because the one close to them just wasn't able to figure out the problem. And they were very, very concerned. They didn't even know it was a scorpion sting at first. They just thought he was literally dying. And eventually he got better. They got him some antivenom, and he fully recovered in a few days. And then, still had he's kind of sluggish for a week or so. But this deeply affected the mother. And I don't hope people can relate to this. I hope mothers and parents haven't gone through something like this, but I imagine that they have. It ended up creating some very real PTSD, where the thought of anything happening to her son was completely overwhelming. It wasn't just a worry or a concern. It was visceral. Her heart would start racing. At certain points when it got really bad, she couldn't breathe. So she knew that she couldn't just deal with this and work through it mentally and talk through it with herself of like, he's fine, he's all right. We have better healthcare set up now. We have some training. We're going to start spraying for scorpions. None of that logic and just trying to reason her way through it. None of that was working. So she sat down and she approached it through the other direction of starting first with her body. She did some tension release exercises where it's a really, really cool technique where you are releasing pent up energy in your muscles and in your nerves throughout your whole body. And as you release that energy through movement, it releases this internal mental and emotional tension that you have, because they're both connected. Mental and emotional and physical, it's all the same. It's just the same energy taking a different form. So when she wasn't able to do it through the thoughts and the feelings process, she started first with the physical. And by releasing that stress and tension through a physical route, she was then able to release it emotionally. And now she's doing so much better. She's still concerned and worried. And when her son wanders off, like he always does, she freaks out a little bit. But it's not visceral. It's not debilitating. And I think that's a beautiful thing where we're not locked into a specific process or system for making change. There are principles that our body and our mind operate on. But when we understand that, we can apply those principles in so many different ways. And if this way isn't working right now, for whatever reason, you can apply it this other way. If meditation isn't working for you because you like to get up and move and you can't sit still for a while, you can meditate by running, by riding a bike. And I think that's so cool that people think that in order to become this mindful, happy, peaceful person, you need to become a monk or a guru that just sits and meditates all day. And I'm like, no, that was one way of doing it. But these types of growth and these types of I would even say this kind of healing is possible to everyone. I don't think there's anyone in the entire world that can't benefit from understanding how their body and their mind work together Just you don't even need a lot of like biology and science understanding. Just some basic principles that I've explained to toddlers and they understand. Um, and then apply that and then just stay committed to it. It's not that hard. You just need to do it in a specific way or apply the principles in a specific way. Um, so to bring it full circle, thoughts do affect our feelings, and feelings will also end up affecting our thoughts. And I think that's awesome, and it's cool because it gives us more opportunity to affect and change that system. We're not limited to one specific input area. We can input here or we can input there. And however we choose to do it, we're going to see really cool results.
Can you expand or explain what's going on, what's actually happening in the brain? Like for your friend, when her son was stung by the scorpion, she had this big traumatic experience, and then instantly she's got PTSD, and other people have had it. Maybe they've been robbed, or people coming back from war. What is actually going on in the brain?
Yeah. So anytime we experience a change in how our mind operates, how we think or perceive or understand things, it's due to neuroplastic changes. Neuroplastic just meaning the brain's ability to change and adapt based on its experiences, right? And I think the most potent example of this is PTSD, where, like you said, in a split instance, someone's entire way of living is completely shifted and altered. They see their fellow soldier get blown up by an IED, and all of a sudden they can't sleep at night, and they're seeing things and hearing things. That is crazy how fast that can happen and how widespread of an effect it can have. It's like I wish I could have had an experience like that in school where snap my fingers and all of a sudden I know everything, because when it comes down to it, the brain is learning. It's just learning in a very negative, detrimental way. So the key to all neuroplastic changes is that one, there's either high emotional valence to it. Valence meaning just like importance or value. It's kind of the term we use in neuroscience. I think just in biology in general. Or neuroplastic changes can happen through repeated firing. So we see that with habits, whether good or bad. The more you do something, the more you think a certain thought to yourself, the more permanent that becomes. What wires together fires together, and whatever you tell your brain to do repeatedly, it gets really, really good at doing. With that, our brain has had this really, really high emotional, what it deems important experience. It was really, really scary, or I literally saw someone die, or my son almost died, and it creates a new neural pathway to learn from that experience. So it's I saw using the example of the girl with the son. Next time she sees a scorpion, if she hasn't worked through this, it's going to cause a visceral effect in her. Or next time her son starts having that weird breathing pattern that happened, it's going to cause this visceral effect, because her brain is saying, oh, we've seen this before. Last time this happened, this really, really bad thing happened. We need to do something about it. We need to react. It's a learning process. Our brain has learned to react in a certain way based on an experience. And we see this happening all the time. Obviously not to the same extremes as PTSD from war or near-death experience, but I've worked with so many people who have had what I call dating PTSD, where and not to downplay the significance and the impact of true, real, diagnosable clinical PTSD, but I use the term dating PTSD because it helps people understand what's going on. They had a really, really bad breakup where they had their hopes up and they thought they were the one, and then all of a sudden it comes crashing down, and now it affects every single relationship going forward. Their brain is trying to protect them from what they thought was something really, really bad. Boiled down, it's really just the brain learning. And unfortunately, it learned a lesson that isn't always true. Not every scorpion that you see is going to end your son's life. Not every girl that you start to fall in love with is going to break your heart. But our brain is so adamant about protecting us and keeping us safe that it would rather take the risk of being wrong and protect us from potential harm than be a little more lax and let us take that risk. Simply because the last time we screwed up, it was so impactful and it was so hard and it was so scary. So yeah, boil down simply, PTSD is an extreme and like instantaneous learned experience and learned reaction that may or may not be based on true facts or justifiable, reasonable facts and details. But I want to take a positive spin on this, because it's never fun talking about PTSD and little boys almost losing their life from a scorpion sting. This doesn't always happen, but in the same way that we can develop this PTSD from a negative experience, we can experience kind of what we call like reverse trauma by having a really, really high valence, like really, really high emotionally important and significant experience that then creates a lasting positive change. So you see it happen with people who almost died, and sometimes they get PTSD, and sometimes all of a sudden their eyes are open and they're like, wow, I survived. I need to be living my life different. I would call that reverse PTSD. It's not debilitating. It's not trauma, but in a way it's like emotionally traumatic. It's this huge shakeup in what you understood and what you thought to be real. I've seen it happen with kids who won a sporting competition. They weren't super invested in basketball, and then all of a sudden their team they make the game-winning shot, and all of a sudden all they care about is basketball, and they're so down to just work hard and practice every day. So in the same way, we can have these really negative consequences of really traumatic, scary experiences. We can also deliberately create experiences that move us in the opposite direction, that create lasting neuroplastic changes in our mind, but from good, positive emotions and experiences. And I think everything in the brain is cool, but this is another thing that I think is so cool, that it's not just this, okay, how long can you last before you get some trauma and some PTSD? And then you're over the course of your life, you're just slowly degrading down and becoming more and more miserable. But in the same way, we can drop down in our happiness levels because of something intense and severe. We can bump up in our happiness levels because of something intense and really, really potent. I don't think it's our brain's natural tendency to do that. Our brain is designed to keep us safe and prevent us from dying. But we as human beings, we can take over the controls on that process. And instead of just letting our brain decide what's going to be traumatic and scary for us, we can take over and say, I'm going to let this experience be so powerful and so potent and awesome for me that it's going to change how I see things going forward. I'm going to let it give me reverse PTSD. In fact, I'm going to choose to focus on certain aspects of this experience to heighten the emotional valence of that experience, to the point where my brain has no choice but to change and adapt, to take in this new information and let it create neuroplastic changes that will be for my good and for my benefit. And it's, again, I think that is so awesome that despite the natural tendency of the world around us to just bring us down and to throw terrible things at us, that we can also use those exact same principles and process to to create something even better.
Are people predisposed to experiencing and having their brain wire something in that's super traumatic in a good way or negative way? So a person's in the hospital because, well, they just had a heart attack, right? And so going back to what you're talking about, so they've had this experience with death. Now, there's three potential outcomes. One is now they have PTSD and they're freaked out and they're worried that, and they have these different things that may trigger this response, and now they feel like they're dying and they go into this panic mode. And then another response is their eyes were opened and they're like, man, I'm going to live life just completely different. And so it's rewired their brain to now they're going out and living every day like it's their last, and they've used it for this extreme positive event. And then there's the person in the middle who just kind of, they had a heart attack, they wake up on the gurney, they're good to go, and they just kind of look up at the universe and they're like, not today, and they go about it, and nothing has happened, right? What determines what about their brain wires it as a negative experience for one person, a positive experience for the other person, and maybe no experience for the person in the middle?
That's a really good question that I think we're just now starting to talk more and more about. I think I mentioned this earlier. Whatever we tell our brain to do repeatedly, it gets really, really good at doing that thing. And so if you are constantly telling yourself and telling your brain to look at how dangerous something is and to prioritize emotions of fear and worry and anger and heartache, it's going to get really, really good at finding that and prioritizing it and putting emphasis on those things. And conversely, if you are constantly telling your brain to look for and find the lessons from something, the good that can come from it, all the tools and resources that are still available to you, all the opportunities, then your brain gets really, really good at that thing. And then when something comes along that is intensely, just really, really severe, and emotionally salient, our brain now either has a tendency to, it has become really good at seeing how bad that is and how terrible and dangerous it is, or it has gotten really, really good at seeing how awesome this opportunity is. And not to say that if you've been a cynic your whole life that you're doomed to get PTSD from a near-death experience, because we do always have control over the experience, but our choices, that's what creates the tendency that our brain has. Whatever pathways we fire repeatedly, they get bigger and they get wider and they get more insulated, and we recruit more neurons to make it instead of a dirt road going through the countryside, it is now a 10-lane highway, where it not only does the brain have the potential to go down that pathway really easily, but it actually wants to go down that pathway, whatever pathway it was that we created, whether the good or the bad. I don't know about that third one. I definitely do know about, it is PTSD versus life change for the better. And one thing to kind of along with the choices that we've made and where our focus is, one thing that has come up repeatedly in PTSD studies, because they noticed that sometimes soldiers would experience the exact same thing. There's three soldiers right there, and the one in the middle steps on a landmine and dies. The soldier on the left gets PTSD, and the soldier on the right is fine. He's heartbroken and he's sad and he's distraught, but he doesn't return home from war with PTSD, even though their experiences were exactly the same. And part of that, I think, is what they've chosen to, what skill they've chosen to develop in their mind, where they've chosen to develop their focus. But also there seems to be a history of previous trauma, as well as what I would call biological trauma, chronic inflammation in the brain, which just puts our brain into this heightened state where everything is at risk, and everything is a danger, and everything is harmful. And so the brain's going to naturally try to protect itself when we're in this high inflammatory state. Granted, I don't think that has as much impact as what we're choosing to focus on and what we've trained our brain to focus on. But there is a lot of research surrounding our physical health in regards to how we respond to traumatic events. I know people who have had, multiple near-death experiences growing up as kids, didn't really bother them, but then something really traumatic comes along and it shatters them, because it's like their mind was just barely holding it together. It had received all these cracks, and then something big comes along and it just breaks apart all the way. And again, not to say that if you've had traumatic experiences, you're doomed to get PTSD next time you get in a car accident, but rather I share that as an encouragement for people to work through whatever scary and traumatic experiences they've had, because if you're able to heal from that trauma, it's no longer going to affect you going forward. The soldier that returns home from war with PTSD, if he had worked through trauma from growing up, whether it was bullying in high school, abusive relationship in his family, whatever it was, if he had been able to work through that, he's not going to carry that with him into war, making him more prone and susceptible to full-on PTSD. So again, it goes back to, what have we trained our brain to do? And we have the power to, wherever we came from, we have power to control how we are feeling and how we are working right now. Whether we had traumatic experiences or not, we have power and control over if we choose to continue holding on to those traumatic experiences, and if we choose to work through them and make ourselves stronger, both mentally, physically, emotionally.
When you're talking about working through that trauma, and like you mentioned before, when you were rock climbing and you were struggling, or you were using rock climbing as a coping mechanism because you hadn't worked through the breakup with your girlfriend, what exactly are you talking about? What is the process of working through?
That's a good question. And that's something that my company, Transcendous, that was one of our primary goals with creating the Live Free program. With the Live Free program, just brief background for listeners, it's a 40-day neuro wellness course that you do on an app where you're watching a video each day and you're applying those things that you learn to slowly start making shifts in your neural pathways and consequently your experience. And although it's not solely designed for those that are working through traumatic experiences and those heavy burdens, it's because it's also designed for people that are just blah and aren't thriving and want to thrive, like you benefited from it, even though I would say you were thriving before you did the program, but you're able to take all this and apply it and learn how your brain works and just start excelling. And so one of the things that we can do to work through these traumatic experiences is one way, like, again, that first step is awareness. If we're not aware of it, we're not going to be able to work through it and understand it. The second step is that recognition, and not just recognizing that we have it, but also recognizing why we have it. How is it affecting us? Why am I holding on to it? Why is my brain still holding on to these emotions? Why does it think it's beneficial for me to hold on to this? Because any time we're doing something or experiencing something or feeling something, it's because our brain thinks that's beneficial. And oftentimes it's mistaken. I wouldn't say that anyone who is experiencing depression because their brain decided that depression was the right way to go, I wouldn't say that their brain is correct. I would say that their brain is confused and thinks it needs to feel that way in order to meet some need. But we have to sit down and figure out why our brain feels it needs to hold on to this, it needs to feel this, it needs to be totally preoccupied with this, whatever it is. And once we're able to figure out why our brain has latched onto this and has taken this course of action, we're able to show our brain a better path. But we're able to show it why this wasn't the best idea. It's like, that's outdated information. That you're basing all of this on the assumption that A equals B, and we now know, the 5 years later, I now know that A does not equal B. So I don't need to hold on to that premise. And instead, I can show my brain, actually, A equals C. This would be a better basis for that premise. And as you're able to offer your brain this better, healthier route, and you're able to show it why it's going to be so beneficial, everything that you have to gain from choosing this new path, and everything that you gain to lose if you continue down that old path, when you're able to show your brain the consequences of staying in that old traumatic victim mindset, and you're able to also show your brain the benefits of taking this new pathway, the brain can make that switch almost instantly. Sometimes we have some habits, and some just neural pathways that have been firing for so long that they don't want to stop firing. But our brain now has shifted to this other way of thinking and this other way of perceiving. And I know that sounds so vague and just nebulous of an idea, but it can actually be a very physical and real process. I sometimes sit down and I brainstorm and I journal, why am I feeling this way? Why does my brain think it needs to feel this way or hold on to this experience? And then I journal another paragraph. This is why my brain is wrong in thinking about that. This is why my brain is wrong to think that I will meet my needs by feeling this old way. And then I come up with a new way of being, a new pathway, a new mental belief, a new, we call them maps, systems and rules that our brain operates by to live and interpret this world. I come up with a new map, a new belief system for myself. And then I show my brain why this new way of thinking will actually be so much more beneficial than my old way of thinking. I thought I was protecting myself from heartache by not putting myself out there and going on dates. Well, actually, that's my brain thought that's how it was going to protect me, by just no longer date. I can't have my heart broken if I never invest it into anyone. And then I show my brain, actually, that's keeping me really lonely. That's preventing me from feeling any sort of loving connection. And then I'm able to show my brain a new way of thinking. Actually, if I go out on dates, ignoring the potential for heartache and heartbreak, I'm able to feel loving connection just by going on a date with someone and connecting with them over dinner and talking about common interests and finding that emotional intimacy. That's a much better way of feeling loving connection versus trying to avoid losing loving connection by never allowing myself to connect with anyone in the first place. So in short, the way to work through that is to figure out why your brain is doing what it's doing, why it thinks it's beneficial, because I promise you, for some weird reason, it thinks it's beneficial. It's probably wrong, but the brain always has a reason for what it's doing, even with extreme cases like PTSD. The second step is to show your brain why it's wrong. Show your brain why that way of thinking is preventing you from achieving and gaining what you want, whether that's love and connection, success in your career, raising a happy family, whatever it is. And then the third thing is you have to give it something better to hold on to, a better pathway, a better way of thinking, because our brain can't just stop firing a pathway. It needs something to go down. And if we try to block this pathway off and get rid of it, but we don't build something else, it's eventually just going to reopen that pathway and start firing again. So we have to block it, or we have to figure out where the pathway is, why it's working, block it, show our brain why it's wrong, offer it a better solution, a better way of thinking. And I know people that have tried doing just one of those steps or just two of those steps, and it doesn't work. You really need to have all three, and it's not just some magical rule that we came up with at Transcendous. It's based on the biology and the physiology of how neural pathways are formed, how they're reinforced, how they're degraded, and how we're able to switch over to a new pathway. And so again, that's why I say that if you just understand some basic physiology and you understand how to apply the rules of that physiology, you can do incredible things. I don't need to know as much as Andrew Huberman. I don't need to know as much as somebody who's slicing brains in a lab and looking at them under a microscope in order to understand how to work with my brain. I just need to understand the basic principles and functions, and then I just got to do it. I just got to apply those principles and functions. But that healing is so possible, and I think so needed in today's world. And I wish more people understood just that simple process of how to rewire your brain and had the tools to be able to do it. And when it comes down to it, that's why that's why I'm doing what we're doing. That's why we created Transcendous, because more people need that. And it's something that should be available to everyone, is available at a intellectual level. It's that level of understanding, I think, is available to everyone. There's just there's no system or process for people to get that information yet.
Yeah, and I know for me, you call them the mental maps that we all have, which I've heard it also called mental models or mental processes, right? The algorithm we use to perceive the world, that our brain then takes information that we're receiving and determines what to do with it based on those different maps that we have built in our brain. And I did go through it, and through the 40 days, I realized that there was some maps that I was operating on that were very outdated and needed to be updated to fit my future goals and where I was headed. Even though I felt like I was thriving when I started it, it still gave me an opportunity to find the next gear. But it also gave me the tools so that in 6 months, 8 months, I can revisit and make sure that the mental maps that I'm running are still current, are still relevant. And we talked a lot about neural pathways in the program and developing neural pathways. What happens so say we've decided we're going to create a new neural pathway because we want to maybe cure an addiction or something. What happens to that old pathway once we've got the brain firing on a new neural pathway?
The brain is a very, very efficient organ. It has to be because of how much RAM it's running through. And whenever our brain realizes that a pathway is no longer relevant or needed, there are actually special neurons. Well, not neurons in the way that you think of them as sending signals, but brain cells, specialized brain cells that come in and actually break down old pathways. They'll actually kind of digest these resources that are just sitting there unused, and then move them to somewhere else in the brain. Maybe even that new pathway that you just formed and that you're now reinforcing with more neurons and more myelination along the sheath. Granted, that process, it doesn't happen instantaneously. It's not like as soon as we have a new pathway, this other one gets broken down. Mm-hmm. We can create pathways really, really fast. Again, everything we've talked about with PTSD, both the good and the bad. But breaking down those pathways takes a little bit longer. And so the key is to, after we've created that new pathway, we have to continually fire that pathway, which is hard. And I'm guilty of this too. Sometimes I'll fall back on that old way of thinking and accidentally tell my brain, hey, let's hold on to this a little bit longer because we may want to use this every 3 or 4 weeks when we're not in a good mood. But the key to being able to let that pathway fully break down is to stay consistent with the new one. And there are so many tools and resources to staying consistent. In fact, we can build up the willpower like skill in our brain, and we can build up our desire to stick with that new way of thinking, and we can build up our commitment to that new mental belief that we have. And all of that will help us stay driving that pathway instead of falling back on that old one. But eventually that pathway does degrade, which is a beautiful thing. I know people who used to have a drug problem and they worked through. Granted, that's a really, really strong pathway, a drug addiction. And they were able to create a new pathway, another way of dealing with the stress of everyday life, or dealing with the intense trauma that they went through growing up. But they would still feel the urges for that old pathway. The brain was like, hey, we haven't fired this pathway in a while. We should probably fire it. And they had to stay committed and dedicated to that new one. And for them, because it had started off as such a strong pathway, it took a lot longer, but that pathway eventually did break apart to the point where they can be out and seeing people drinking or smoking and there's not any urges. Sometimes the way they describe it is like, I had a thought where I felt like I should have an urge to go drink. But when I sat with it, I realized that I didn't actually have an urge. I had a reflex of thinking about the urge, but the urge itself, the desire to drive that old pathway, wasn't there anymore. And with non-addiction pathways, the process is obviously a lot faster because they're not as heavily reinforced. But sometimes if it's something let's say it's a negative self-talk pathway that we have been reinforcing since our childhood, that could take a little bit longer to break down. But at the same time, it's always possible to break it down. There are no permanent pathways in our brain.
I hope that you're enjoying this episode brought to you by Aceva. Aceva offers all-natural, clinically inspired nutritional products which are designed to help you live life to your full potential. They create custom supplement packs that are tailored specifically to your needs. With Aceva, you take a short quiz, and from your answers, they build a custom supplement pack just for you. I've been using Aceva for a while now. I have more energy, I'm recovering faster, and I'm even sleeping better. And the best part is that these supplements come pre-packed and are labeled AM, PM, and before bed. This helps ensure that I'm getting exactly what my body needs when it needs it. If you're not taking a daily supplement or are just unhappy with your current one, I highly recommend taking Aceva's short quiz and trying one of their custom supplement packs. And if you use code LifeEdge at checkout, you'll save 50% off your purchase or subscription, but you'll also help support this podcast. You can find the link down below. Now back to our conversation. What role does emotion play in forming our neural pathways? Like when we were talking about PTSD, you were talking about it being a very visceral, emotional experience, and even for the person who experienced some traumatic event and had a positive benefit for it, it was still emotionally connected. And when I was going through Live Free, and we were talking about some of the meditation and the visualization, you emphasized trying to experience the emotion you would feel on a very deep level. And so why is that so important? What's actually going on that emotion is so important in developing those neural pathways?
So I think people don't realize that our brain is not just a physical organ. It's also an emotional organ. So in the same way, our brain needs nutrients, it needs water, and it needs electrolytes. Our brain needs human connection, and it needs certainty and stability, and it needs fulfillment. It needs all of these more emotional needs. It values as just as important as the physical needs. And so in the same way that our brain is able to make physical changes, it's a better way to think about it is that it's not making physical changes. Our brain is just making changes, and those changes are both physical and emotional. So it doesn't like you could. So let me share a story. So I used to work at a neurology clinic in Lehi, Utah, and absolutely fantastic team, incredible doctor. We were treating things that most doctors were telling their patients they would be stuck with for the rest of their life, or that they would need medication for the rest of their life. We would get the patients that were coming from concussion clinics that had been released and said, "Hey, you're all good to go," and then a few weeks later their symptoms are back. They would come to us and we would fix their health issues. And when probably about 2 years into working there, we got a new device called a TMS, or transcranial magnetic stimulation. And it uses magnetic field pulses, where it's turning an electromagnetic or an electromagnet on and off really fast, and the on and off of it creates a field of electromagnetic energy that is pulsing through. And we would we'd map out their brain, and we would situate the coils on a specific part of their brain, and then fire a very specific frequency of these pulses to either increase the activity in a part of their brain or decrease the activity in a certain part of their brain. So we were making some very physical changes. We were teaching this part of their brain to fire more, or this part of their brain to not fire as much. So for depression, this part of the brain isn't very active. And so we would go in and teach that part of the brain to be more active. In anxiety, this part of the brain is overactive. So we would teach this part of the brain to be less active, to calm down. And with that, we saw absolutely incredible healing. And so many people recovering 6 weeks of treatment, and then they don't need to come back for more. Maybe once a year they come back for like a tune-up appointment. But I noticed that the difference between the patients that would see really, really incredible turnaround and the changes would stick, and then the patients who either wouldn't see the progress that they wanted, or their symptoms would come back after they finished treatment. The difference between those patients was what they did with their emotions. If they did everything they could to be positive and to focus on the good and to see this as a new opportunity and a new start, and like, wow, I'm going to go out and I'm going to do everything that I wasn't able to do before, those changes stuck. Because we got the physical, and then they supplied the emotional. Whereas the people that kind of took a more passive approach, they said like, yeah, fix me, do the TMS on my brain, and I'll be better. Sometimes they would start to feel better, but as soon as we stopped, because they hadn't also supplied the right kind of emotions to those changes, their symptoms would come back, their depression would come back, or they didn't even see any growth or progress at all. It was like a reverse placebo effect, where their brain was preventing the healing versus being the source of the healing. We can't just fix the physical, because that would only be fixing a part of the brain. The brain isn't just a physical organ, it's emotional. And I would even add spiritual as well. But we cannot just treat one or the other. We have to approach it from both directions. If I eat just terrible food, a very high inflammatory diet, sugar and seed oils and fried foods, my brain will become inflamed, and that will lead to the development of possibly Parkinson's, but most definitely depression, anxiety, and eventually Alzheimer's. Even if I am working on staying positive and I am trying to focus on the good things, if I am really, kicking my, like if I'm kicking my brain in the back of the knees and just making it really hard for it to get back up, doesn't matter how many good things I'm doing emotionally. And the converse is true. If I am doing everything I can to help my brain physically, but I'm neglecting the emotional, I'm gonna struggle as well. And I've seen both of those scenarios play out. And the only time that the people have been successful is whenever they are trying to do both. They don't have to be good at both or even perfect at both, but they got to be trying. We can't neglect one part of our health and expect the other to thrive. It's just not how it works, because they're not two sides of our health. They are the same side of our health. We're just looking at it from different directions, different mediums, different vehicles.
Is our perceived experience of life, whether that be happiness, joy, peace, sadness, and even suffering, is that 100% in our control?
I may upset some people by saying this, but yes, I believe that it is 100% in our control. And with that, I think where people will end up disagreeing with me, it will be because we have different definitions of what our experience is. So to briefly help people distinguish what I mean right there, I think pain is a very, very real experience. Suffering is something that we choose. Suffering is something that we create from our pain or from some other emotion. We don't have control over what people do to us. We can be victims of abuse, and victims of betrayal, anything. But just because that objective, painful experience has happened to us doesn't mean that it is 100% going to affect our experience. We get to choose how we see that pain, how we see that, and how we choose to interact with that experience, how we view our abusers, how we choose to feel about them. All of the things that we experience, our feelings towards someone, are the emotions, the worldview that we buy into. All of that is 100% up to us. It's often influenced by outside influences. Well, obviously, it's influenced by influences. It's influenced by outside factors and by other people and just the environment. But when it comes down to it, we get to control our experience. I may not control what happens to me, but I get to control the Bryson experience that external thing is now entered into. I still get to control this here, my interactions with that thing, my experience with why that the beliefs I have behind why that happened. All of that is up to me, and I think that can be a scary thought for a lot of people. It definitely was for me at first, because if we accept that premise, that we are in complete control of our experience, that everything we're experiencing is because of something we have chosen, or we're experiencing it because at some level, maybe subconscious, maybe an unhealthy map, we have chosen that thing, even if it's what we would call a bad thing. It's scary to accept that, because it means that I'm responsible for all of my suffering. And I who would want to think that it's discouraging and in a way almost kind of shameful, because all these terrible things that I've been blaming other people for and I've been mad at other people for. Oh, it turns out I was the one that created that. Now all that anger and disappointment and frustration and bitterness that I had projected outwards at everyone around me, who I thought was the cause of my suffering, I have to then take that and direct it at me. But then the cool thing is that once we make that connection, we also realize I don't actually have to direct all that shame and anger and disappointment and frustration at me. I don't even need to send it out there. We thought we were justified in sending it out to the terrible world around us and all the terrible people around us that were causing all this pain and suffering. But we didn't need to send it out in the first place. And then the next step in that journey is recognizing that if I'm the reason I've been suffering, that also means that I am the source of all of my growth and joy. I'm the one that opens the door to all those opportunities, because there was never anybody else to open that door in the first place. And I think that's why a lot of people are hesitant to accept the fact that they are capable of controlling their future, because it means that they have to admit that they are the reason they are in the current state they're at. And it's hard. It's really hard. I spent months grappling with that idea until I was finally ready to admit that, yeah, I can point to it. I see and I can understand. I can no longer deny that all the suffering in my life is tied back to some choice that I made. Maybe not a good choice. Maybe it was a choice to let someone affect me emotionally and irritate me. But it all goes back to a choice that I made. But the cool thing with that is that now, because I've accepted that, I am now the one that is in full control of my life and my future. And there are times where I'm not being a very good steward of my life, and I am not making all the right decisions, but I can't deny and ignore the fact that if there is suffering in my life, that it's because of me. If there's disappointment, it's because of some expectation that I created. That if there's heartache, it's because I wasn't wise with how I used my energy. So
I love that, because I know for me, my life really changed when I realized that everything I have in my life, good, bad, it's all there because I created it. And
yeah,
that was something that took me a long time to grasp and overcome. But once I realized, like, this is the life I have created, which means I don't have to stay here anymore either. Right.
Yeah.
And so
that's
where
the cool part.
Yeah.
Well,
that's where you finally feel empowered. Like, okay, I can start to make some changes.
Yeah. I wrote a haiku like 5 years ago, just like on a whim. I was just playing around with words, and I wrote it down, and I didn't realize how impactful it was until maybe a year ago. Hopefully I'll try to remember it. Ignorance is bliss and knowledge is misery, but wisdom is peace. And I think that I accidentally predicted the journey that I was going to be taking, where it's easy to feel good about things. You can feel good about being angry at the world around you and all the terrible injustices. I don't know how or why, but it releases something inside your brain that makes you feel good about being angry when it's all the injustices out there. And how dare they? And it's such a terrible world, and they're doing all this to me. But then, as we really understand what's actually going on, all of a sudden it becomes miserable, because we have to embrace and come face to face with that notion that, I'm the reason I'm overweight. I'm the reason I have brain fog. I'm the reason none of my relationships work out. I'm the reason I lose my job. I'm the reason I am still in debt. That's hard, and that's miserable. But it is the necessary step in moving towards I have complete control of my life. And now that I have complete control of my life, I can change it. Whereas before I was saying that the world had complete control of my life. The world impacted how I felt, what I did, my wealth level, my job, my career, my even my hobbies, what I'm expected to do and to like. But then once we're able to take back that control, then that's when we unlock all of these opportunities, because we're able to accept the fact that we're in control. And it sounds like you've had that same journey yourself. And the more people I talk to, they've had that same process of opening their eyes. I think it's kind of just whatever direction we want to go, whatever we want to do in our life, if we're going to become creators and we're going to become people that we're happening to life and not life is happening to us, we have to go through those 3 steps. I can't imagine it happening really any other way. I don't know how you can gain control of your life without first accepting the fact that you are responsible for whatever you're feeling.
Is it ever too late to start? And what I mean by that is, when it comes to, we hear the term a lot thrown around, like neuroplasticity, and you have high amounts of neuroplasticity when you're younger. But then you get older and it's like, well, no, you're just set in your ways and you are who you are. Is that true?
No, not at all. Our neurogenesis is definitely higher when we're in our teens and even early 20s. At that point, it's the default. Just because that's just how we are developmentally. We used to think that neurogenesis and neuroplasticity slowed down mid-20s, late 20s. Now we know it's not that it slows down, it just doesn't become the default. All of a sudden, instead of just becoming automatic that we're going to be neuroplastic and we're going to be easy to change and learn, now it is all based on lifestyle and the choices we make, the diet that we eat. There's a fantastic book, I don't remember the name of the author, but it's called The Neurogenesis Diet and Lifestyle. And it is an incredible tool. It's a drier read in the sense that it's not a novel. It's just laying out the facts and like, here's how you do this, here's how you do that, here's how to change this, here's the research behind it. But it is very practical. And one thing that he goes into a lot is that neurogenesis is something that neurogenesis, I don't think I've defined it yet. It is the birth of new neurons in the brain, usually in the hippocampus, and then they migrate to other parts of the brain. But it's how we replace dying neurons. It's how we enable greater neuroplasticity, because we are providing our brain with more tools to create those changes. Neurogenesis is going to be deeply connected to, it's hindered by toxins and physical damages and inflammation in the brain. And then neurogenesis is promoted by certain foods, an active lifestyle, gratitude, spiritual connection, emotional, social connections, and all of that. So neurogenesis tends to die down, but it doesn't have to be that way. Again, we have complete control of our life. That seems to be the common theme here. And even if we feel like we are struggling, like we screwed up in our teens and our early 20s, we were just out partying every weekend and we didn't learn anything in college, and we have terrible habits, no willpower, we're depressed, we're anxious, all of that. One, we can always come back from that. And I think the key to that is this certain part of our brain called the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. It is the part of our brain that is responsible for willpower, or doing something hard. When they stimulate it with transcranial magnetic stimulation, the sensation that people describe is, I feel like there is a storm coming, but I'm ready to face it. And I think that's such a cool visual. So it's the part of our brain responsible for doing hard things, willpower. That area of our brain is super plastic. It responds incredibly well to when we tell it to do something hard. It gets good at doing that, at being willing to do the hard thing faster. We can develop willpower and the habit of doing hard things faster than other habits. And so I think if you are struggling with something, and you just can't make the changes that you need, like you're just like, I can't do an ice bath, I know that would help with my inflammation, or I know I need to work out, and now I'll feel so much better if I do, but you don't have enough willpower to do that, start first with trying to increase neurogenesis and neuroplasticity in your anterior mid-cingulate cortex. And the way that we do that is we just do something hard each day. Maybe we don't take an ice bath. Maybe we just take a colder shower. It's not even cold all the way. It's just not warm and toasty. It's uncomfortable. Or we tell ourselves, you know what? Instead of eating my normal 2 donuts at work today, I'm just going to eat one. That's going to increase the neuroplasticity in that part of our brain. And as we do that, we'll get better and better and better at doing hard things. And then once we're really good at doing hard things, we can do the hard things that are going to be really, really beneficial for us. And the cool thing about this area of the brain is that it stays plastic well into, I believe, like our 80s. So unless you're fully in a nursing home and bedridden, this should apply to you. You have the ability to increase your willpower and be able to do hard things, the hard things that are going to be beneficial for you. So there is always hope, even if we've totally screwed up in the past. Even if we don't think that we can come back from the bad mistakes that we've made, our brain is plastic, which means we can change. And that's something that's available to all of us. It's not just available to the geniuses out there. It's available to everyone. And that means that all of us have this potential to completely turn our lives around. Or if we feel like we're already on the right path, we can thrive even more, even faster, go to greater heights than we thought were possible before. It just starts with these small little choices. I think people underestimate the power of these little choices, of taking a slightly colder shower. They're like, that's not going to do anything. No, maybe not right now, but it's going to increase the ability of your anterior mid-cingulate cortex to do hard things, which means it'll be easier to get up in the morning tomorrow, which means it'll be easier to go on a short run. And then after you've gone on that short run, you're going to be better about going on a medium length run. And you just keep building. And so I think that is highly encouraging and extremely motivating, because not only am I trying to convince myself to do these hard things for whatever intrinsic benefit they have, the anti-inflammatory effects of a colder shower, but now I'm doing that colder shower so that I can do all of those other harder things tomorrow and next week and next month. So yes, neurogenesis doesn't stop in our 20s. It is always possible to create neuroplastic changes in our brain. We just have to make certain small choices to enable it, and then support our brain, which is this incredibly powerful tool that all of us have, but very few of us know how to use well. It's all just about learning how to use this really, really powerful tool a little bit better every day, so that we can do more fun things, more fulfilling things, have deeper relationships, have higher highs and even lower lows, and feel the contrast between those emotions and enjoy that contrast, and just ride that roller coaster and constantly be moving up a little bit every single day.
It's interesting you say like lower lows, but you can't experience happiness and understand happiness if you haven't felt sadness, right? And so as you've learned more and more about the brain, how the brain works, I think the common theme out there, or the common wisdom, was that we use 10% of our brains. Would you say that's accurate? And then are we ever going to get to a point where we can use more of our brain than 10% of it?
So I don't know exactly where that originated from, the whole 10% of our brain. It's not true. You do fMRIs and you might only see 10% of the brain light up right now, but if you give a brain another task, more of it's going to kick in. And I think why people bought into that so much is because they're like, wow, there's so much potential for us. We could become 10 times smarter, do 10 times more. The thing is that the brain isn't just this linear computing program where in order to double what we do, we need to double the space. Our brain is really, really efficient. And I think what makes it so efficient is the complexities of these connections. We don't need bigger brains. We just need more efficient brains. We need brains that aren't hindered by toxins and inflammation and limiting beliefs. There are times, in fact, we've even seen this in exercise science, where they think that like these weightlifters think that they are lifting their max, and then they do one little thing to engage their muscles a little bit better, and all of a sudden they're able to lift 30% more, which is crazy. 30% more when people are lifting their max. That's like, you would be happy to get a 5% increase in your personal best. It's all about using what we have more efficiently. And along with using it more efficiently, it's the not wasting the resources that we have. When our mind is so distracted, we can't do one thing well. We're never going to be able to do twice as much with twice as much energy. We're going to be stuck trying to do that one thing until we're able to block out those distractions, which is a skill. It does take some time to do that, and it takes time to think more creatively, to be able to use more parts of your brain to solve the same problem. But it's not a question of unlocking access or unlocking access to other parts of our brain that we're not using, or unlocking these neurons that we just were forgetting about. But it's about learning how to use everything we have more efficiently. When we get stuck in our fight or flight response, our brain restricts blood flow to our prefrontal cortex. And it redirects it all to our fight or flight response areas of our brain. And so in a way, sometimes we aren't using all of our brain, but it's not that we're only using 10% of our brain across the board. Sometimes we may deliberately be choosing to, well, maybe not deliberately choosing. We may end up only accessing parts of our brain that are serving us at those times. Maybe that's where they came up with that 10%, and then it just got misinterpreted. So maybe the scientists that originally proposed that were accurate, and then pop science took it and misinterpreted it wrong, and now everybody thinks that we're only use 10% of our brain. No, in certain circumstances, we can electively choose to only use part of our brain. That is just the reflexive fight or flight response. But whenever we choose to remove ourselves from that fight or flight response and shift back into a parasympathetic, calm, relaxed state, we're able to regain blood flow to all these areas. It doesn't shut off completely. It just becomes very minimal. But if we want to be able to think creatively and problem solve and have higher executive function, we need blood flow to that prefrontal cortex. When people are stressed out, they are terrible at creative problem solving. And then when you take those people that are stressed out and can't solve a problem, and you get them to relax, and we're able to return blood flow to the prefrontal cortex, all of a sudden they're able to come up with more creative solutions to whatever problem they were facing.
Being in the flight or fight response, or the sympathetic nervous system, is not ideal for solving problems and being creative.
Yeah, and that's I have a friend who is was a third grade teacher, and she told me that they had stopped doing timed multiplication facts test, where they're given a list of all the multiplication or addition tables, and they have to fill out all the answers. They realized that when they were just applying the science, when they had a timer and it was stress and you had to put your pencil down as soon as the timer went off, and if you don't get all the answers, then you're not going to get a good score. They stopped timing kids and they started doing better, and they actually started performing faster, which is crazy. It's not crazy. It makes sense, but it's such a novel idea to me, because that's how I did my grade school. Is we had time tests, and we had to be able to think really, really fast. And I would remember looking at a problem and be like, I know the answer. I know the answer to this. I've done it 100 times, and I just couldn't get the answer out. And I think a lot of us can relate to that, but we also don't realize that that same problem is happening at work or in our marriage or with our friends, where when we feel that urgency, all of a sudden we can't come up with solutions to the problem. That's why you ask your friend for relationship advice and they're able to give really, really clear advice, is because they don't feel any sort of threat or urgency in this situation. They're not in what we call confined state. And so they're able to see things really clearly, and they have full access to their prefrontal cortex, and they're able to give really, really good advice and answers that after you hear it, or you're like, how is that's so obvious? How come I didn't think of that? Well, cut yourself some slack. You were in a fight or flight response, really stressed out about what you were going to do in this situation. So of course you didn't have the ability to problem solve this scenario like they did. And with that, we don't have to be stuck in that fight or flight response whenever we come across our problems. If we learn how to take a step back and not feel that urgency or that stress, still we still want to be care, or like we want to care for the problem and be invested in solving it. It's not an apathy. But when we don't feel that urgency and that tension and that stress, we're able to think and function so much better. And I think that relates to corporate world, like that relates to relationships, to raising your kids. Think of how many times we could totally change the direction of a kid's life by not approaching some terrible thing that they did with tension and stress and anger. If we're able to approach it with that love and kindness and find a better solution, I don't think it would be going too far to say that we would literally save lives doing that. We could save marriages. We could save way more marriages and relationships. And we may even be able to help people leave relationships that aren't good for them, because of the clarity to see that the solution isn't staying in this relationship. Everything becomes so much clearer whenever we're able to access more of our brain. Which is funny, because we started this conversation by saying we are not limited to just 10% of our brain. But in a way, we can sometimes become limited in what functions and areas we have access to. But yeah, it's so we don't have this cap on 10%. But sometimes we can, give ourselves a handicap by not allowing our brain to work all together and to work in sync. Instead, we rely on reflexive, kind of fear-based, stress-based strategies.
Through your work and the Live Free program and what you guys offer, you focus a lot on helping people change their mental maps and rewire their brain and help reprogram them for good, so that they can grow, so that they can move forward, so that they can be empowered to overcome and achieve things that they never thought possible. Where do you see neuroscience going in the future, and in regards to things like mental health?
I think there's already a trend in the direction of proactive, preventative mental health. We just saw this huge boom in mental illness in the last 15 years. And then since COVID, it spiked again. And we're getting better at treating it, but we're also unlocking more understanding for how it starts in the first place. I think, unfortunately, there's also some conflicting factors in there with the advancement of technology and how that's affecting mental health. And I don't think we'll really be able to slow down the advancement of technology, but I hope that we're able to learn how to make it work together with our health. I don't think we'll all of a sudden see less phone usage, but we may see changes in technology to promote healthier just activities and lifestyle patterns. So I think we're already advancing a lot in preventative, proactive mental health. And we're also making a lot of advancements in the specifics of these lifestyle changes. Like people have been saying, like working out is good for you and it will improve heart health and it'll improve mental health. But now we're able to say exactly how it will improve mental health, what pathways, and also what kinds of exercise are going to improve your mental health. Even for women, this is the best type of exercise for mental health. And for men, this is the best type of exercise. We have a better understanding of the effects of foods, both the harmful as well as the beneficial. It seems like every day we're discovering a new like superfood. I remember when kale was the superfood, and now we have shilajit and all these other weird foods that one tribe in Indonesia was eating, and now it's being exported all over the world, which I think is cool that we are getting access to all of these things. But at the same time, I think that the mental health and the diet is a lot simpler than like we had great mental health before we were exporting shilajit to the US. I think we're getting a lot better at proactive, and we are learning a lot about. It's almost like the field of psychology is disappearing and getting swallowed up by neuroscience. And so I think that we'll see less and less of just cognitive behavioral therapists where they just sit on a couch and talk and try to make progress by working through emotions through discussion. We'll see more calibrated, systematic approaches to rewiring the brain. We're already seeing that in the Live Free program, where we're like, here's how to change these pathways versus let's talk about it until you feel better. We're saying, okay, you don't feel good. Here is the system for changing it. I think we'll see a lot more of that type of or those types of tools and resources incorporated into mainstream mental health care. We'll see a lot more neuromodalities such as TMS and cranial nerve stimulation, something we saw at the Neuro Clinic in Utah quite a bit. I think those will become a lot more commonplace for even just regular therapists. They'll be combining physical modalities with that emotional approach that they've been specializing in for so long, but they're going to be adding something a little more physical, a little more neuro-based into their system.
Yeah, and it's you mentioned craniosacral, and my wife is actually going to go see a craniosacral therapist
Cool.
tomorrow, and that's something I didn't even know what it was. I mean, she's even a myofunctional therapist, and I'm like, I don't know what that is, but then I became one of her patients, and the benefits I've received from it have been mind-blowing. That it's just that it feels like we're making so many advancements in so many different directions, not just in the neuroscience world, but how the whole body works together. And it's going to be exciting what the next 10 years looks like.
Yeah, I'm really excited, especially with how exponential the growth has been. In fact, I was talking with one of my neuro professors years ago when I was still in school, and he said, is like, the neuro textbook we have now, it came out last year, is already out of date. We've already discovered things now that are proving what we have in here is wrong. And it was cool by the time I got to my advanced neuro course, we were only using the textbook for basic like structure and physiology. And then we were just reading all the research papers that were coming out. Like, this is how nicotine affects the brain. And this is how you're able to form more dendrites on the axons, these specific pathways, because of this research paper. And the crazy thing is we weren't even able to keep up with all the research that was coming out. And that can be a little overwhelming. It's like, well, why bother learning any of it if you're not going to be able to learn all of it? And whatever you learn now is going to be out of date in a year. But I think that it's this continual process of just improving our understanding. It's never wasted. To read a research paper that gets updated or changed or modified, next year, we still gain something from it now, and we are still able to apply a 90% correct principle now versus waiting until we had the 100% correct principle later.
Or sticking with the 10% correct principle from before.
Yeah, no, exactly. I know doctors that, they haven't changed the way they do medicine in 10 years. And I'm like everything you are doing now, people are learning completely different stuff in their undergrad. Like, you got to change. You got to learn. It's like I think we'll be held accountable to the level of knowledge that we had available to us. And the cool thing is we have so much available to us. Anybody can go online and learn about how these different parts of the brain work, or these different parts of their body work, or more accurate nutrition for their specific gender and age. Like, that's so accessible to us that we don't really have any excuse other than laziness for not understanding, or at least not trying to understand, because it can be overwhelming, but there's so much available to us. And I love that. And it's scary and it's overwhelming, but it's exciting.
Your work focuses heavily on empowering people to live a transcendent life. What does the ideal transcendent life look like to you?
I would say unhindered by limiting beliefs and restrictions, and empowered to create the life that they want. I can't imagine a better end goal than being able to move towards what you desire the most efficiently, and being very, very fulfilled in that process. I don't think everybody that let's say we have 100 people that go through the Live Free program and they all have life-changing experiences. I don't think all of them are going to become millionaires. I don't think all of them are going to get married to their high school sweetheart. I don't think all of them are going to become professional athletes. I think it's going to be, but the thing that they will have in common is that they will all be living the life that they want to live in the way they want to live, while being deeply fulfilled in that process. I think that it's more about finding that fulfillment and being able to feel fulfilled and joyful and peaceful in the process versus getting to some point. I think we need to have an end destination that we want to move towards, because that's what gives structure and shape to our journey and shows us where we need to make changes. But a happy, truly transcendent life is about what that process looks like today. What does my day-to-day look like? Am I happy? Am I resilient? Am I able to find people to love and connect with? Am I able to find joy in every little thing that I do? Or am I constantly feeling like everything's a burden and a hassle? I think the goal is to find that fulfillment and to experience the peace of knowing you're on the right path and you're moving towards what you love. Even if you're not there yet, it's the moving towards the things that I think brings even more joy than getting there. It's the process of loving someone versus having a happy marriage. It's all those little things you're doing together to create joy and to deepen that relationship. It's not the relationship that you're going. You're not happy because you have a deep relationship with someone. You're happy because of all the things you're doing to deepen that relationship. And I think that's more possible than people realize.
Bryson, what's one lesson you've learned in life that you want to share with the listener?
I think if I had to break it down, it would be something to understand that we are responsible for everything going on in our life, both the good and the bad. And then the one thing I would recommend everybody do is to go out and just do stuff. Find a hobby, take an online course, develop new friendships, find something to be passionate about, because that will be the vehicle for growth. I think if everybody had something that they were deeply passionate about, that they could engage with on a physical, emotional, psychological, and just even a spiritual level, that will operate as a vehicle for the growth and the change that they're looking for in their life. If anything, it will show them where they're weak, or they have limiting beliefs, or where they need to change. And if people can experience that and become aware of what they need to change because they've been actively engaged with some activity or some experience, then I think people will naturally change and grow. So know that you are aware, or you are responsible for everything going on in your life. You have control over how you feel, and your health, and your emotions, and your relationships. And the best way to create that growth is to go out and do stuff. Just be engaged with life. You will, I promise, if you're just engaged with life, you will find what you're looking for, and you will be constantly redirected in whatever direction you need to be moving to find what you're looking for. Things happen when we move, when we act, when we get up off the couch and we just go do things.
So Bryson, I know that you do have an offer for our listeners. Would you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we have a free PDF download of journaling prompt questions that we have carefully designed using neuroscience to help individuals create better and just greater personal clarity, broken down into 3 sections: clarity about your past, clarity about your present, and clarity about your future, which I think we'll make that link available in the show notes caption. But it's a free download, and it's all of our favorite journal prompts that we have found to be most impactful and have the greatest, open the greatest doors for growth and understanding as people move along their own personal journey. But yeah, we'd love to share that with all the listeners. It's a good one. I use those journal prompts myself still.
I'd highly recommend checking that out. I still talk to a lot of people today. One of my favorite questions to ask people is like, hey, what's your goal? Where are you headed in 3 years, 5 years? And I'm blown away still at the response I get or the number of people who respond like, I just don't know. And It's like, well, then how do you know the actions you're doing today are going to get you to where you want to be if you don't know where you want to be? And so it's important. I think it's very important to know where you came from, know where you're at, and know where you want to go. And so I would highly recommend checking that out. We'll definitely put the links down below in the show notes. Bryson, where can people go to learn more about you, learn more about Transcendous, or even sign up for Live Free?
So we're on most social media platforms, but I'd recommend going to our Instagram. That's where we put most of our content. A lot of free tools and resources and info that we share on a regular basis. Our Instagram handle is livefree_neurowellness. So livefree_neurowellness. Send us a message on Instagram. We'll reply to it. You're lucky to catch us at the early stages of our development where I can message people personally and it's not outsourced to some, social media intern. So we'd love to connect with you. We'd love to hear your stories, hear your questions, your challenges, and as well as your successes and what tools you've used to improve your own life. You can also go to transcendous.com. That's the word transcend, OUS.com. And that's where people sign up for the Live Free program and learn more about it. And if you have questions about the Live Free program, you can message us on social media, and we'll more than happy to explain more and to share more of those details with you.
And I will make sure to, again, include those links as well below in the show notes. I'd highly recommend checking out the Live Free program. I have gone through it personally. My wife is currently going through it. like I said earlier, it helped me realize that there was some old mental programming that I needed to update because I was headed the direction I wanted to go, but there was ways to make it faster and more efficient, like Bryson mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And so again, I'll put the links down below in the show notes. And if you like this podcast, please be sure to like, subscribe, share it with a friend so we can continue to get great guests on here like Bryson. Bryson, thank you so much for your time today.
Awesome. Thank you. It was a pleasure talking with you and exploring all these awesome ideas.